Do you remember in mid-50s, Black suffered some very painful defeats. In main line was bishop g5. Three Argentinian losses within few hours. And then also there were problems in poison pawn variation, where Black had to find an antidote against White's immediate breakthrough in the center. Which happened a bit later when Fischer in early 60s spent time in analyzing these positions and finding best defenses for Black. But in late 50s, Black, and namely Fischer, who was one of the most adherent players of Najdorf, concentrated on the so-called main line, which is developing the pieces. Bishop e7, queen c7, knight bd7. And White, most of the time, played g4, advancing on the king side, and after b5, taking on f6, with the idea of pushing g-pawn, and then h-pawn, and then f-pawn, attacking immediately, trying to exploit its advantage in the development, having more pieces in action. Fischer even tried once strange move g takes f6, which worked against Gligorich, and Fischer described Gligorich's surprise, even horror, when he saw such an anti-positional move. Then Fischer spent some time in his book, My Six Memorable Games, explaining the rationale behind such a move, but with all explanations that one can provide, g takes f6 is g takes f6, and this move, of course, was, if not refuted, but put out of test by White, which eventually found a number of very promising continuations. Of course, Black was sticking to knight takes f6, g5, knight d7, and here is one of the key positions that was played in many games, including top games from the candidate tournament, I think virtually everywhere except World Championship level. White tried first quiet move a3, just making sure that knight from c3 will not be pushed by Black pawn. But we also have just to remember that very often in these lines, White has to sacrifice one of the knights. Either knight f5, and after e takes f5, there is a square d5, which is ideal location for knight on c3, or knight goes on d5, and then after e takes d5, White has pawn on d5, and then knight from d4 could go either on f5 now, either on f5 or on c6. So having the white pawn on d5, of course, helps, and it also opens e-file, which could cause extra problems for Black, because Black king most likely stays in the center under such circumstances. But after a3, rook b8, Black doesn't want to lose time and just pay attention, because rook b8 after a3 is one of the typical maneuvers in Sicilian, especially in Najdorf. Now Black is trying to play b4, and after a b4, rook comes on b4, and White king is also not feeling quite safe. So h4, b4, a b4, rook b4, bishop h3, and now Black has a choice. I mean, Fischer played, for instance, castle here, and after knight f5, knight c5 was managed, knight e7, queen e7. That position looks quite dangerous, but probably also playable. There are other moves, knight c5, f5, queen b6, or even queen b6 immediately. And how do you like such complications? Knight f5, rook b2, and White sacrifice a piece, but position remains unclear. Black probably should play king e8, but you will see more of these lines on the side games that will be provided with appropriate analysis. So eventually White decided that wasting time on a3, it's not the most useful thing in such a double-edged position, and concentrated on immediate f5. It's quite unusual for classical openings that sacrificing a pawn which could be taken with a check is a good move. And on other hand, taking the pawn with a check is not the best option. Black tried bishop takes g5, and after king b1, knight e5, queen h5, queen d8, white most likely has to play h4, because after rook g1, bishop f6, f6 castle, bishop h3, g6, black position on the king side is quite solid. You see, it's very difficult to attack a g6, which is the key square for white to organize any breakthrough. So that's why it's better to play h4, and then after bishop f6, f takes e6, castle, bishop h3. If white plays g6, then queen goes on e2, and h-pawn could advance on h5, creating extra weaknesses in a pawn structure surrounding black's king. Black eventually decided that taking the pawn is giving white a small plus and not enough risk, and turned to another move which looks too risky, too dangerous, knight c5. And after f6, other moves like h4 are not as dangerous. f6, gf6, gf6, bishop f8. Looks that black lost even more space, and just a matter of time when white could find the breakthrough. But any breakthrough, any further development of the attack should continue with a sacrifice. Most likely the sacrifice of the knight on d5, as we already discussed. But sacrifice is always a sacrifice, so black hopes that it could refute the attack, or at least defend the position, keeping some material advantage, which could be returned in favor of some positional achievements. But white recognized that immediate attacks like queen h5, rook g8, that's a very important move, taking the control of g-file, are also having a great square for black rook on g6. So these attacks like e5 will not work after bishop d7. So it's as often happens in Najdorf and in many other Sicilians, black should be extremely careful not to lose immediately. It should be extremely cautious in avoiding immediate dangers. White, on the other hand, should think of the long-term strategical dangers, because if they don't achieve anything immediately, then black finishes the development, brings its king to the safe haven on the queen side, and with two bishops and with good pawn structure may look into the future with great optimism. So it's natural that after queen h5 was met by rook g8, white decided to play rook g1, now taking control of g-file and preventing rook g8, but also preparing rook g7, because appearing on g7, white rook puts black in difficult situation, whether to take the rook with the bishop, but then the pawn appears on g7, and it could be even more dangerous than the rook, or tolerate it, which is also quite unpleasant, because this rook creates enormous pressure on f7. Normal moves like bishop d7, rook g7 led to, in practice, led to difficulties for black. So b4 forces white to sacrifice a piece, but black experienced great problems, as you can find out from the games that were played. And latest attempt, which was quite successful, is h5, quite a strange move. h5, black just doesn't care about the development, plays pawn moves, but it has a lot of sense, because h5 square is a very good and very dangerous location for white queen, which attacks f7, and combined with white rook on g7, it puts enormous pressure on black's position. And now after rook g7, black plays b4, practically forcing white to sacrifice a knight, knight d5, e5, e5, and knight d7. This is a key move of black defensive strategy. Knight goes back, it wants to be on e5, and on e5 it may consolidate black's position, so it could cement it, and even despite immediate dangers that are quite obvious, black has a lot of defensive resources, and so far in practical games white couldn't prove that it has something that will refute black's risky but ambitious strategy. But I wouldn't tell you whether this line is good or bad. I wouldn't give you any evaluations. It's Najdorf, it's Sicilian. It's up to you to make all the difference. You have to analyze it, and you can find now with computers, with the chess programs that you can use extensively and without any limitations while sitting at home, you can make yourself all the difference for you in one game and also for the opening theory in general. I will be waiting to see more games played by these sharp lines, because more games, more analysis could tell us more about Najdorf and about final evaluation of this sharp line. But on the other hand, I don't believe that the final word will be spoken any time soon. So play it with white, play it with black. Just be confident, and remember that it's all in your hands.